You've taken long enough for that sketch. I shall expect a really fine work of art.
Oh, no, don't look at it. It's not nearly good enough.
But it can't be as bad as all that. Now, don't rub it all out. Let me see it first.
Well, it's the perspective. I never can get it right.
Oh, dear. Tell me, is it the perspective that gives my nose that curious twist in the middle?
If you love listening to this show, please consider giving a rating and a review on Amazon Alexa or wherever you listen. We want to continue bringing you this amazing content, and part of our ability to do that means that we need a big audience. Now, it may not seem like much, but rating and reviewing the show will help more people find us, just like how you found this show. Simply on any podcast platform, search for our show, scroll down to the bottom, and push 5 stars. It's that easy. Thanks for supporting the show. Today, I'm joined by C.F. Martin IV, Chairman and CEO of C.F. Martin and Company. Thanks for joining the show today.
My pleasure.
All right, so let's start with your legacy story of your ancestor, C.F. Martin, who founded the company.
Okay. How much time do we have? It's 180 some years. And we have to go all the way back to Germany, where my great-great-great-grandfather grew up in what at that time was my family's business of making furniture in a small town called Marknerkirchen, which was located in Saxony, Lower Saxony. And that town was also known for making musical instruments, but not the guitar. For example, the violin. A lot of violins were made in Marknerkirchen. And so for whatever reason, as a young man, CF took an interest in the guitar. The guitar had worked its way up out of Mesopotamia over a period of a couple thousand years. And, by the late 17, early 1800s, the guitar had really kind of become something that everyone recognized, all right? It's not a lute, it's not a vihuela, it's a guitar. It has 6 strings and it works. And he sensed opportunity. But the violin makers were like, nope, don't bother, it's a fad. Stick with furniture. That's what your dad does. That's what you're trained to do as an apprentice in the German system of apprenticing. Well, he must have been persistent because his dad got him a job in Vienna in a guitar shop. And he moved there at the age of 14 by himself and studied as an apprentice under Johann Stauffer and learned how to make very fine Viennese style guitars. Came back to Germany. And while he was away, the violin makers were like, we should check this out. So they got in the business. They used, still the law today, this kind of like blocking mechanism of you didn't apprentice. You didn't go through the formal apprenticeship as a instrument maker. You're a cabinet maker and you have to start in the beginning. He was impatient. And he also had some friends in the New World who said, come on over, check it out. And so he packed up his family, his tools, some wood, probably some finished guitars. And in 1833, he settled in Manhattan, opened a little shop on Hudson Street. And, from there, I think the timing was good because as immigrants were coming to America, the beauty then and today of an acoustic guitar, it's portable. And you could come to New York or Philadelphia or Baltimore or Boston. And one of the things you might buy as you went west was a guitar to entertain yourself and your family and your friends.
I mean, it's such a fascinating story, and we're going to examine some of those kind of fabrics, even in your, kind of your lifetime and the career as a CEO.
Okay.
Is this notion around innovation and some of the market handicaps, or I guess, the story you told is really more of a competitive set of pressures, right?
Yep.
That kept them out. And, I think there's also a lot of risk taking involved. Because to be well established in one particular form of art in the furniture area, to pivot to something completely different and entirely different domain, without the typical, apprenticeship and the kind of, set of steps or protocols that was required. Again, a lot of risk taking. And the other thing is, I think the market demand, which is quite interesting because, the immigrants that were coming to America at that time weren't incredibly wealthy per se. So for them, purchasing this acoustic guitar was almost like an heirloom in itself. It was like a major purchase relative to the overall discretionary income. So just one more point I'm going to come back to asking some questions is, we've seen on the piano side, classical piano side, how over the last 20 plus years, we've seen a steady decline in demand. And something so complicated yet so beautiful, we're starting to see the potential end-of-life demise of the art of the classical piano, potentially. So fast forwarding a little bit in terms of the prior generation, because you're the sixth generation. Can you talk about how that evolved from that initial story to where it is today?
Well, let's go all the way back again to CF, because his initial guitars were really in the style of his mentor, Mr. Stauffer. And the only thing that, when I look at them, I take away from it is the headstock looks a lot like a Fender Stratocaster. So I think Leo Fender might have been inspired by it, but the rest of the guitar was kind of quirky. And so he, in his career, in his lifetime, he pivoted from copying his mentor to copying the Spanish builders, because that was a style that more people were familiar with. And the Spanish guitars didn't travel well at that time. They were made in Cadiz, where it was hot and humid. And if you sent them to New York, they would crack in the winter. So by making guitars in New York, and then he moved with his family to Pennsylvania in 1839, the guitars remained in that climate. Then his son joins the business. As is often the case in a family business, he was a steady Eddie. There's a saying in a family business for the second generation: if mom or dad came up with something cool in the kitchen or the garage and built a business, don't mess it up, right? But he had to deal with, for example, the Civil War. 50 miles from the Martin Guitar Factory, Americans were killing Americans while we're trying to run a business. Ironically, the guitar was part of the Civil War, because at night, there was no radar, right? No night vision goggles. Each side would move away from the battle line. They'd build a fire, they'd cook some food, and someone would pull out a guitar on both sides. And there are stories about them trading licks across the dividing line. How about that?
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Absolutely fascinating. So going a little bit fast forward, of course, the guitar category has really changed. I mean, if you look at where it's gone from, let's say, the 50s to the 60s, 70s, and now more, I guess, more the amplified versions, how did that evolve, and how did the different generations adapt to the market needs?
For us, a very significant transition probably started in the teens, and by the early 1920s, the traditional Martin guitar that looked like a Spanish classic guitar was no longer in vogue. People really wanted guitars from Spain, and by then the Spanish guitars were much more robust and they traveled better. So we adapted our guitar to the strings that were already being used on the banjo and the mandolin, and they were made out of metal rather than gut, and the sound was much more pronounced. And so that was the beginning of the modern acoustic guitar, because the steel strings now are steel. And then, of course, from that came the electric guitar, because the steel strings interrupted that magnetic current on the pickup, whereas the gut string and the nylon string, had the acoustic guitar not used steel strings, it would have taken longer for the electric guitar to be invented, because nylon and gut strings don't interrupt that magnetic field and they don't work.
Now, again, going back to kind of the original story of breaking the mold, is that, I'm just thinking at the period when it was transitioning from the metal strings to electric guitars with amplifiers, that was a pretty major shift, right? And it really must have challenged kind of the framework and what people consider as music from a guitar point of view. And how did you guys overcome that?
You may also like our quarterly Ask Your Perkins event that brings some of the most notable experts and category-leading startups in their area of sustainability and human survival on Earth and in space. To register, visit askyourperkins.com/events.
We started that relationship. My dad joined the family business the year I was born, 1955. and he caught the folk boom. The folk boom then became a part of the rock boom with folk rock. Had they not met, we would have gone in maybe two different directions, right? So we're making folk guitars for folk musicians, and then the musicians migrate to California. They're playing more electric, but there was always a time in many of those performances when someone would play a ballad, and an acoustic guitar with a microphone, and then of course later pickups on acoustic guitars was much more appropriate. And then you get like super group like Crosby, Stills and Nash, where the acoustic and the electric, it depended on what song they were playing. And so we participated in that, even though, we kind of rode side saddle with the electric guitar. We dabbled in it. We were never successful. And it's not what people want from Martin. People want a good, solid acoustic guitar from Martin. And hey, I'm happy to stick with my knitting. It's worked pretty well for my family and me.
Gotcha. Understood. So let's talk a little bit about, under your helm for the last 35 years. Again, a lot of changes must have happened, but I'm just curious if you could just highlight maybe a couple of areas that's been really kind of pivotal for the organization.
Sure.
And then also, I guess really the question I have for today is the need for instruments have slowly started to decline. So if an artist is making music, because so much of it's being made in a studio context, it's all being digitized. So what are some of the concerns about these physical instruments potentially having a lesser or discounted role?
I don't want to say I've seen this movie before, but I've seen a movie just like it. So my dad catches the folk boom, folk rock boom, great. By the mid to late 70s, the guitar business, particularly the acoustic guitar business, really dropped off. And by the early 80s, it dropped off quite dramatically, right around the time I graduated from college and joined the company. And it was primarily because people were tired. They wanted something different musically, the artist and the audience. And the digital sampling keyboard came along. So now you have a keyboard. If you could play the piano, you could push a button and you could theoretically make your piano sound like other instruments, right? You could make it sound like a flute or a bass or a drum. And so people said, that's it. That's the end. We don't need any more guitars. And I joined the business. I become chairman. I'm scared to death. We had some issues. I said, we've got to fix these issues around, how the guitar plays and intonates. My colleagues were like, okay, Chris, but where's this business going? I said, oh, no, I don't know. Let's just fix it. And then you know what? MTV Unplugged happened. And I am eternally indebted for MTV Unplugged, reminding people of just how cool it is to pick up an acoustic guitar and sit on the couch and just play a song. And, a lot of musicians, yes, what you hear about is the music they made in the studio. You don't hear about is the music they make at home. Right?
Beautiful. Really love that. Fantastic. So how do you foresee, kind of moving forward? Again, you have built an incredible, you yourself have created your own set of legacy within this business.
I have a lot of good help. I'm very fortunate.
And of course, I think we've heard a lot of different interesting things. I think just recently on NPR, they were talking about German mid-size or SMB family businesses and how they've been impacted by COVID. But I'm just thinking for your type of business, as people for the last year or so have stayed home, I wonder if the business has actually increased because of the desire to want to connect musically at home.
Absolutely. And I'm not alone. Every one of us who makes a guitar today, and I want to give credit to the fact that guitars are good today, generally. When I was younger, there was a risk. When you went and bought a cheap guitar, the risk was it didn't work well and you got very frustrated. Today, particularly if you go to a reputable music store or a reputable online dealer, you're going to get a product that they stand behind. Yeah, not $29, but $229, good beginner guitar. You go from there. What we found during COVID was that people had time on their hands and they wanted to reconnect with the guitar. And all of us who make guitars right now are back ordered, not just Martin, everybody. Yeah. It's an amazing thing. And what I'll say is, I'm proud that we can help it. The real disconnect right now is we've got to get musicians who make a living back on the road in venues where we can go hear them so they can continue to make a living.
Great point. Absolutely. And I think everyone is talking about effectively kind of the roaring 20s happening again, as I think people are ready to go out and really consume and be in connection with others, including concerts and venues of that sort.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about sustainability. I know that
sure.
for CF Martin, reforestation has been a very important topic. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
I can. I'm not the expert. I rely on my colleagues who are closer to the trees than I am, and the really trusted relationship we have with some of our vendors, some of whom are very small family businesses, but they love sourcing exotic woods, and they love the fact that we want them to do it ethically. That's really the challenge today is, this stuff's really valuable. The wood's really valuable, and it deserves to be treated with utmost respect. And so that's why people like myself and Bob Taylor and Tom Bedell are trying to get the word out that you want to make sure that your guitar, your musical instrument, your piece of furniture, that the wood was ethically sourced. Because if it isn't, that's a problem. And sooner or later, that problem is going to catch up with us. And we're going to be scratching our head going, where did all the good wood go? And it's like, well, we didn't take care of it. And so the next step is, yes, can we help the folks that are closer to the tree, that may have ownership or maybe it isn't even ownership of the land. They have they're in charge of the land, right? And a lot of indigenous people will say, we don't own the land, but we are in charge of it. And so one of the things we're trying to explain to them is, it takes a long time for these trees to grow, but don't give up, right? And if we can help you, grow some saplings that are then at the point where they can be transplanted, and then we're like, it's going to take 100 years. Absolutely. This is for your kids' kids. But in the meantime, let's plant that mahogany tree or that rosewood tree or whatever. And then around it, you plant fruit and nut trees, because you can harvest those much quicker and you can work the land. What you don't want to do is cut down an old growth tree and put a cow there, because then none of the trees come back. So it's a question of education and patience. And I think maybe because I'm in a multi-generation family business, I'm willing to say, if it isn't for me, it's for my grandkids.
Actually, that's a really fantastic point that I think, unless we're talking to family businesses, that really doesn't quite get drawn out, is that the time horizon for most businesses, certainly publicly traded, are really quarterly. And then even those that are privately held are monthly. But when we talk about family businesses that are multi-generational like yours, you're really thinking through generations, truly. So the current set of reforestation efforts now is really going to benefit maybe your next generation. I think your daughter, there was a reference, but maybe even after her, for example.
Exactly.
So that's a really interesting mindset. Can you help us kind of better understand it? Because I think most listeners don't quite understand it from that point of view.
Don't forget to visit astroperkins.com to register for our next quarterly events. Past and current speakers include Julianne Hough, actress, dancer, and winner of Dancing with the Stars; Damian Vaughn, former NFL player; Neil Gregory, Chief Thought Leadership Officer at the IFC World Bank, and many more. To register, visit astroperkins.com and click on Events.
Well, it probably depends on what business you're in, right? I mean, if I was in the business of making chipboard, I would say, I want to grow pine trees. I want to get them about this big. I want to grow them in a row and then harvest them every 5 years. It doesn't work that way for guitars. That's the one thing I learned by being in my family's business, that there's an acceptable way to make a good acoustic guitar. And it helps if you have big, wide pieces of exotic timber. So that's kind of the catch-22, is if we don't have that wood, I'm not quite sure how to make a good guitar if we don't have the wood. I've tried other materials. I think they're fine, but whoever figured out 150 years ago, that rosewood, mahogany, ebony, and spruce make a great acoustic guitar. They nailed it.
Now, of course, we're talking about exotic timber. However, just in general, I think timber industry has been affected pretty seriously in terms of shortages because of people doing home projects and do-it-yourselfers, but just general construction efforts. Is that having an effect on some of these niche exotic categories as well?
No, the challenge right now is the logistics for anyone who's making guitars, any musical instrument in quantity. It's the story is, can I get all the raw materials? Because, just in time was something that a lot of businesses embraced as best they could. And one of the things we did commit to a couple of years ago is we said, look, the wood in particular, given the drying time and the logistics of getting it from Central America up here in a kiln, we need to take more cash and invest it in more wood. So we actually have what we call a strategic wood reserve. We forgot to have a strategic tuning machine reserve. So we're chasing things like tuning machines and gig bags and fret wire and finishing materials.
My goodness, amazing.
Yeah.
My last question, and then we're going to wrap it up here for today, is kind of fast forwarding, let's say almost like 2050. I mean, again, it seems somewhat unfathomable, but with Elon Musk and many others are talking about not only space travel, but terraforming on the moon as well as eventually Mars. Now, whether we think that's viable or not, that's besides the point. But music is always going to be part of kind of a human experience.
Yes.
But as we've seen with augmented reality, where visual artists are starting to create art or painting in complete virtual form, and you're starting to see non-fungible tokens or NFT types of paintings that's in a kind of virtual context. Again, I think the acoustic guitar will have a lot longer longevity than a classical piano, but how do we ensure the preservation of these instruments? And we have, if you look at longer history, time horizons, there are instruments that have come and gone.
Yes, a good guitar is durable. So if you take good care of it, you can pass it on. It may need some adjustment along the way, but the bigger question is, but boy, this darn guitar has been around for a long. It's like I said, the darn thing came out of Mesopotamia. So I don't think I think we may see up. And the ukulele. Look at how popular the ukulele is today, and that fuels the guitar market. I don't know. There's just something about, again, it fits. It works. You can do it by yourself. You can do it with your friends or with a band. I don't think it's going anywhere. I could be wrong. I think it's going to stick around.
Well, I'm personally hoping, and
me too,
that not only the guitar acoustic form is going to stay around, but that the bands and the musicians will come out in full force in the next few months.
And let me just share one thing. I was at a NAMM breakfast, and Jake Shimabukuro played, and then he was interviewed by Joe Lamont. And he said, Joe, when I was young, I didn't have a tribe at school because I wasn't into sports. And then he said, I was okay academically, so I didn't really gravitate to those kind of clubs. And then he found that, he said, I started dabbling and playing the uke, and I found that other kids liked music too. He said, and I found my tribe, and I became part of the music culture at my school. So those kids are always going to be looking for that. And as long as we provide them the education and the resources, we're good. We're good to go.
So on that note, I've been joined by Frederick Martin IV, who is the chairman and CEO of CF Martin and Company. Thanks for joining today.
Thanks. A lot of fun.
If you've enjoyed this episode, take a moment to rate our show on any podcast platform that you listen to. Scroll down to the bottom and push 5 stars. It's that easy. And as always, thanks for listening.